Imagine a crime so bold, so meticulously crafted, so staggeringly complex that even seasoned investigators almost refused to believe it was real. Imagine a man who spent years planning, studying, surveilling, manipulating, and ultimately executing what he believed would be the perfect crime. A theft that would go down in history as the boldest robbery ever committed. This is not a Hollywood heist. This is not a fictional criminal genius plot. This is the Antwerp diamond heist. And at the center was a man who thought he was smarter than security systems, smarter than law enforcement, smarter than everyone, until the very locks and technology he studied became the clues that exposed him. When people hear the word jewels, they think of sparkle, beauty, luxury, and wealth. But in the spring of 2003, Antwerp, Belgium, became the site of something far darker. The city was home to the Antwerp Diamond Center, a fortress of glittering stones worth billions of dollars, protected by multiple layers of security, surveillance, sensors, guards, alarms, and locks that most of the world could hardly imagine. A place where vaults were protected by magnetic locks, infrared motion detectors, Doppler radar, seismic sensors, and a private security force that monitored every inch of the building. To most people, this would be an impenetrable stronghold. To most criminals, it would be a deterrent. But to Leonardo Notarbartolo, this was a challenge waiting to be conquered. And he saw himself not just as a thief, but as a criminal mastermind. A brilliant man who could dissect, outthink, and overcome every obstacle that stood between him and the vault. Notarbartolo was not your typical burglar. He was a diamond dealer himself, someone who understood the industry, the players, and the security protocols better than most. He rented an office on Schoopstraat in the Antwerp Diamond District, a seemingly innocuous space that gave him access to the building that held millions of dollars worth of diamonds. He secured this office not by accident, but through careful pretense and planning, using it to study every aspect of the Diamond Center's operations. For over 2 years, Notarbartolo worked like an engineer of crime rather than a common thief. He observed the guards. He watched the patterns of patrols and cameras. He watched every person who came in and out. He noted the timing of sensor resets. He made notes, sketches, and calculations that would fill volumes. And he knew something that few others did. True security is never about a single lock or sensor. True security is about the assumptions underlying every lock, every magnetic field, every algorithm, every motion detector. Notarbartolo believed he had cracked the code. The very heart of the Diamond Center's security was the vault, a place protected by a series of complex systems, including a magnetic lock that depended not just on mechanical tumblers, but on a magnetic field between two plates. If that field was broken or tampered with, alarms would trigger instantly. If the magnetic lock lost its alignment, if the field shifted without authorization, every alarm system in the building would go off. It was supposed to be foolproof, a lock so advanced that even decades of traditional burglary methods would not work on it. But Notarbartolo did not see that lock as a barrier. He saw it as a puzzle waiting to be solved. And so, in what seemed like the perfect criminal gambit, he prepared to bypass the magnetic field itself, to weaken its grasp without ever setting off a single alarm. The technique he employed was not some supernatural trick. It was pure engineering, the product of careful observation, meticulous experimentation, and a deep understanding of how these systems functioned. Notarbartolo and his crew had studied every detail. They discovered that the bottom portion of the screws securing the magnetic plates could be removed when the sensor was inactive. Once those screws were taken out, they could replace them without breaking the magnetic connection permanently. This meant they maintained the illusion that everything was untouched, all while gaining access to the vault without triggering a single alarm. To anyone outside, it was as if someone had simply walked into the vault unnoticed, bypassing every security measure with ease. In many ways, it was a stroke of criminal brilliance, the kind of heist that Hollywood would dramatize as a masterclass in ingenuity. For a moment, it seemed like Notarbartolo's plan was unfolding flawlessly, each step executed with precision and foresight. Every detail had been accounted for, every contingency considered, and every risk minimized. The crew moved like clockwork, shadows within the secure room, leaving no trace of disturbance behind. It was the kind of audacity and technical skill that inspired awe, terrifying in its potential, brilliant in its execution. And yet, beneath the perfection, there was always a tension, a silent question. Could even the smallest misstep undo everything? For now, though, success appeared certain. Notarbartolo's plan, daring and intricate, held the promise of triumph. The world outside remained unaware, oblivious to the precision and cunning unfolding just beyond their perception. It was the calm before the storm, the quiet confidence of a heist executed with engineering mastery rather than luck. Each screw replaced, each sensor manipulated, each motion calculated, all converging toward a flawless, breathtaking result. And in that moment, Notarbartolo was not just a criminal, he was an architect of one of the most daring feats the banking world had ever seen. On the night of the heist, the crew entered the Diamond Center with confidence, bypassed all the security systems, and walked away with jewels, diamonds, and stones valued at over $100 million, an amount so staggering that it shook the global diamond market. Reporters called it the heist of the century. Investigators were left baffled. No alarms triggered, no security footage showing forced entry, no guards caught sleeping. Nothing. Just billions in diamonds vanished into thin air. But what makes this crime shocking is not just the enormity of the theft. It is what happened afterwards, when Notarbartolo began to believe he was untouchable, that he was somehow beyond suspicion, beyond investigation, beyond transparency. He thought he was the smartest man in the room, and he trusted in his own genius to cloak him from every angle. That confidence became his Achilles heel. While investigators initially had no leads, as time went on, tiny fragments of evidence began to surface, and the painstaking work of detectives slowly began to unravel the illusion of the perfect crime. The very techniques Notarbartolo used to manipulate locks, screws, and magnetic fields, things he thought were invisible, became the breadcrumbs that eventually led investigators to him. One of the most ironic elements of the entire case is that the magnetic lock itself, the very system he had studied and exploited, became the lens through which the crime was unraveled. Experts scrutinized every aspect of the vault's access. They examined the subtle alterations in plate alignment, the minute changes in magnetic fields, and the tiny traces left behind that hinted at manipulation. These were details invisible to the untrained eye, almost imperceptible, yet detectable to those with the right knowledge and forensic skill. The evidence spoke not of chaos or randomness, but of method. It pointed to planning, calculation, and expertise, a deliberate, knowledgeable human actor rather than a lucky or reckless intruder. Notarbartolo's arrogance was the quiet catalyst of his undoing. He had assumed that no one could ever connect the dots back to him. He believed his techniques were too subtle, too clever, too complex for anyone to detect. That confidence, that sense of untouchable superiority, blinded him to the fact that expertise leaves its own traces. Every precise adjustment, every careful maneuver, every exploitation of the magnetic system created a signature, a mark that could be read by those trained to see it. And that was his downfall. In thinking he had outsmarted the system and the people behind it, he underestimated the very intelligence and scrutiny that would eventually expose him. The same brilliance that allowed him to penetrate the vault also painted a trail leading directly back to him. In the end, methodical precision became the evidence of his guilt. It was a lesson in hubris, in the idea that mastery over a system can give someone power, but mastery alone cannot shield them from accountability. Notarbartolo had planned the perfect crime, but even perfection leaves whispers behind, and those whispers told the story of his undoing. He began to piece the puzzle together. Surveillance footage from outside the building captured glimpses of his presence at critical times. Financial anomalies in his accounts raised red flags, showing movements of money that could not be explained away. Testimonies from people who had grown suspicious of his sudden wealth and lifestyle added another layer of evidence, painting a picture of someone living beyond his means in the aftermath of the heist. Each clue, taken alone, might have seemed insignificant, but together, they formed a web that led directly to him. The magnetic lock, which he had so meticulously disassembled and reassembled without triggering any alarms, became the symbol of the investigation. It represented both the brilliance of his planning and the vulnerability inherent in every human act. While he had bypassed the lock with ingenuity and precision, he could not erase every trace. Every adjustment, every manipulation left subtle signs, tiny imperfections that forensic minds could detect and interpret. These traces allowed investigators to reconstruct the sequence of the crime in painstaking detail. The lock was no longer just a security device. It became the key to unraveling the entire operation. Through careful observation, analysis, and relentless pursuit, authorities connected the dots from the vault back to the mastermind. Human ingenuity had defeated a sophisticated security system, but human diligence ultimately overcame the criminal's brilliance. The case became a testament to both the audacity of the heist and the meticulous work required to expose it. In the end, the magnetic lock was a silent witness, holding the story of the crime until those determined enough could read it. Months after the initial robbery, authorities quietly moved in. Notarbartolo was arrested. His carefully constructed cult of criminal genius came crashing down, not in the shadows of a vault, but in the harsh light of a courtroom. The diamonds he had stolen, for the most part, were never fully recovered. Yet the case left an enduring legacy, lessons that reverberated far beyond the confines of that single heist. No matter how clever the plan, no matter how meticulous the preparation, no matter how brilliant the mind behind it, there is no such thing as a perfect crime. Every system can be understood, every method traced, every secret eventually revealed, and no lock, whether mechanical, magnetic, or psychological, is impervious to the truth in the end. The story of Notarbartolo stands as both a warning and a fascination. In the end, the heist was brilliant, audacious, and flawless in execution. But brilliance cannot erase evidence, and audacity cannot defy the law forever. Every action leaves a trace, every decision a shadow, and every mind, no matter how clever, eventually faces the consequences of its choices. In the pursuit of genius or gain, the truth has a way of finding its mark. As the story spread, experts weighed in on what made the Antwerp diamond heist unique. Some called it the most sophisticated theft ever attempted. Others said it was an engineering feat disguised as crime. But in the hushed commentary of detectives, the real lesson was always the same. Criminals make mistakes. Even geniuses make mistakes. Eventually, the details betray them. The lock you think you have mastered might be the very thing that unravels your freedom. Today, people retell this story not just because of the scale of the theft, not just because of the diamonds, and not just because of the magnetic locks. They tell it because it shines a spotlight into the darker corners of human ambition, where brilliance and arrogance blur, and where a man's belief in his own genius leads him to believe he is untouchable. What happened in Antwerp was not just a robbery, it was a lesson in humility, an admonition that no system, no matter how advanced, is immune to human ingenuity, but also that no human scheming is immune to consequence. The Antwerp diamond heist remains one of the most incredible true crime stories in history, a masterpiece of planning that was undone by the smallest of vulnerabilities, not in the vault, but in the mind of a man who thought he was smarter than everyone else.